I covered this VT at the end of side B, and I covered the final crescendo of side A too. But I kept looking at that flower, dead center. I kept thinking, that has to mean something. The disc is round, the flower is round, a full individuated personality is round. But I knew me, so I knew I was always looking for patterns and random events, and I didn't want to touch it. Besides, I was so tired of working on this video, I didn't want to add anything else. But that little flower kept telling me, pay attention. This is the symbol for Ka. In his signary, Owens uses the example konako, kniku in Greek, safflower. That certainly set off my Carl Jung detector. In full bloom, this flower imagines itself a miniature sun, and we project the fullness of our character on the sun and its light. Then I thought, doesn't Ka mean something to the Egyptians? They were practically Crete's neighbors, so you'd expect some Egyptian influence on Minoan religion. And so it does. Ka. It's a vital spark that separates the living from the dead. The Ba is the person's individual character, and if properly released, the Ba will leave the body and join the Ka in eternal life. So now, we can't say I'm reading into this. The Ka was put dead center for a reason. It's a kernel around which our whole being is wrapped. The Minoans understood that in worship there are two parties, the divinity who is worshipped and the one who worships. And how can we, the worshipper, worship the Lord our God with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our strength and all of our mind if we are divided against ourselves, plagued by personality fragments and complexes that deflect our conscious intentions and scatter our focus? How do we know one of these fragments isn't leading us right off of a cliff? This is the meta-genius of the Phaistos disc. It bears a hymn to properly orient us towards divinity and a ritual to properly approach it. But all of this is embedded in a whirling and a spinning, a swastika, like a whirling dervish. Have you heard of those? That's a very famous Sufi order. And do you know where the first dervish whirled? In Kenya, our Stone Age homeland where Cattle Hayuk is. The actual mystic who did it is an Iranian, whose family fled the city of Balkh in northern Afghanistan during the Mongol invasion. Balkh itself is an important center of Zoroastrianism and Buddhism. Zarathustra himself died there. The mystic is also a world-famous poet, and you might have heard of him, Rumi. Because when he lived in Kenya, people called it Rum, which is Arabic for, can you guess it? Rome. Bring it home, boys. Do you know what else whirls and spins like a swastika? You do. Our very bodies are spun together like thread. The Minoans love discs and swirls and swastikas. Here's the Malia stone altar. It looks like the sun. It even looks like the symbol for Ka. There is a hole in the center, one large libation depression on the edge, and 33 libation depressions to cover the circumference of the circle. I looked up the number 33 to see if it meant anything. It seemed to in the earliest parts of the Old Testament, which just might mean we're looking at another Minoan/Hittite influence on the Israelites. Here's our friend, the Uktos libation table, reminding us that it was another swirl. Here's a ring recovered from a site on Crete. Here's the Magliano disc. The language is Etruscan, spoken by the people who were Rome's northern neighbors. It seems to bear instructions on how to properly offer libations to deities, just like the Phaistos disc. More swastikas, more whirls. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Minoan colony of Miletus was the home of Greek philosophy. The city was founded by Minoans and named after a Minoan city, and was full of Minoans. Later, Luwian-speaking Carians moved into the area from south-central Anatolia, our original homeland. Then followed Ionian Greeks, with whom we'd been living and intermarrying for thousands of years. Miletus was near Doric Greek sites in Anatolia. The Cretans were numbered among the Doric Greeks. Also, too, obviously not a coincidence, one of the earliest stirrings of Greek philosophy mentions the nous, the mind. If I were a betting man, I'd say nous is another Minoan word. And how does the nous move? It spins, like a galaxy, just like the Phaistos disc, just like the words on this Minoan cup. Anaxagoras of Clazomenae, born about 500 BC, is the first person who is definitely known to have explained the concept of a nous, mind, which arranged all other things in the cosmos in their proper order, starting them in a rotating motion, and continuing to control them to some extent, having an especially strong connection with living things. However, Aristotle reports an earlier philosopher from Clazomenae named Hermotimus, who had taken a similar position. Amongst pre-Socratic philosophers before Anaxagoras, other philosophers had proposed a similar ordering, human-like principle causing life and the rotation of the heavens. For example, Empedocles, like Hesiod much earlier, described cosmic order in living things as caused by a cosmic version of love, and Pythagoras and Heraclitus attributed the cosmos with reason, logos. The Greeks themselves didn't know where the idea of the nous and its spinning came from. Sounds like the murky past to me. Maybe not so murky anymore. Clazomenae is a bit north of Miletus, but it's still firmly embedded in the same cultural milieu. Millennia later, my favorite psychiatrist in the whole world would witness the same spinning motion. Carl Gustav Jung. CG to his friends. During those years, between 1918 and 1920, I began to understand that the goal of psychic development is the self. There is no linear evolution. There is only a circumambulation of the self. Uniform development exists at most, only at the beginning. Later, everything points toward the center. This insight gave me stability, and gradually my inner peace returned. I knew that in finding the mandala as an expression of the self, I had obtained what was for me the ultimate. Perhaps someone else knows more, but not I. Here's Dr. Jung as a young man, with his wife Emma, and as a old master. But there is a catch. There's always a catch, right? Your noose is only spinning if it's working properly. Otherwise, you're stuck. And may I remind, not prepared to fully worship the Lord. You might get frozen in your tracks, terrified you're going to lose everything or conclude you're unfixable, made too many bad turns. Or maybe you get past that and your whole world gets ripped to shreds, and you're left hanging over pitch blackness. Even the floor beneath you. Gone. You might have heard of Carl Jung through his partnership with Sigmund Freud, and all the rotten stories and icky, creepy insinuations. Here's the reality. Jung had made a name for himself before he ever met Freud. He developed the word association test, and he was probably the first professional to experiment with the galvanic skin response that they use in lie detectors. Scientologists use it in their auditing. All before he ever met Freud, and Freud called on Jung first. The truth is, Freud hated Jung because Jung was the better psychiatrist, with years more hardcore experience in the mental health care trenches, and he was at least as smart. Unforgivable. The best therapy I've ever had was with a Jungian here in Dallas. I knew I got better because I can see it in my dreams. But what surprised me is my long-standing backaches and headaches disappeared. I used to panic whenever I ran out of vitamin I, ibuprofen. My body and my soul were trying to spin, but I wouldn't let them, because I was stuck. I highly recommend a descent into the unconscious. But be careful, there's peril. It is of course ironical that I, a psychiatrist, should at almost every step of my experiment have run into the same psychic material, which is the stuff of psychosis, and is found in the insane. This is the fund of unconscious images which fatally confuse the mental patient. But it is also the matrix of a mythopoetic imagination which has vanished from our rational age. Though such imagination is present everywhere, it is both tabooed and dreaded, so that it even appears to be a risky experiment or questionable adventure to entrust oneself to the uncertain path that leads into the depths of the unconscious. It is considered the path of error, of equivocation and misunderstanding. Unpopular, ambiguous, and dangerous, it is a voyage of discovery to the other pole of the world. So you need a good anchor. The Minoans well understood this danger. Their anchor was ritual and tradition, and there was always an old hand around who could help you out when you needed help. Jung needed to develop his own anchor, and being the genius that he is, he did. Particularly at this time, when I was working on my fantasies, I needed a point of support in this world, and I may say that my family and my professional work were that to me. It was most essential for me to have a normal life in the real world as a counterpoise to that strange inner world. My family and my profession remained the base to which I could always return, assuring me that I was an actually existing, ordinary person. The unconscious contents could have driven me out of my wits, but my family and the knowledge. I have a medical diploma from a Swiss university. I must help my patients. I have a wife and 5 children. I live at 228 Seestrasse in Kunacht. These were actualities which made demands upon me, and proved to me again and again that I really existed, that I was not a blank page, whirling about in the winds of the spirit, like Nietzsche. Nietzsche had lost the ground under his feet because he possessed nothing more than the inner world of his thoughts, which incidentally possessed him more than he possessed it. He was uprooted and hovered above the earth, and therefore he succumbed to exaggeration and irreality. For me, such irreality was the quintessence of horror, for I aimed, after all, at this world and this life. No matter how deeply absorbed or how blown about I was, I always knew that everything I was experiencing was ultimately directed at this real life of mine. I meant to meet its obligations and fulfill its meanings. My watchword was, Hic Rhodus, Hic Sulta. This is Rhodes. Jump here. What I have just read from Jung's memoir is the most important thing anyone has ever said about real mental health. You have to grapple with the animals in your head. You can't let the sleeping dog lie forever. But you can't let them own you either. Otherwise, you're stuck. And you're too important and you have too much work to do to let that happen.